Hey there, this is Natalie, and it's time for the summary of ReZero Arc 7 Chapter 3, which is entitled Versus Rem. I'm sorry this one is slightly later than usual. I was kind of sick yesterday. Nothing serious, but my voice wasn't really up to recording. Still, since I'm already late, there seems like no point rushing to get this one out as fast as possible. And so after the chapter summary, I'm also going to give some thoughts on the chapters we've had so far, and some of the things people have been discussing, like the possible identity of the masked man in chapter 2, and Rem and Louis in general. So stick around for that at the end of the video, along with some theories and speculation about things that I think could happen later in Arc 7 based on the start we've had. As always, please subscribe if you want to see coverage of ReZero Arc 7, as well as of Season 2 of the anime, and also plenty of ReZero analysis and theories. I do also make content about other anime, including Attack on Titan, and I upload several new videos a week, so please help me out by subscribing if you like that sort of content. With that out of the way, let's go over what happened in ReZero Arc 7 Chapter 3, which, as I said, is simply titled Versus Rem. I had to leave that off of the thumbnail because it seems a bit more spoilery than the previous two chapter names, but if you're watching this, I assume you either know or want to know what's in the chapter. The chapter begins with a kind of slice of life scene that must have taken place at the Roswell mansion between arcs 2 and 3, with Subaru trying to clean a room and Rem and Ram berating him for being useless at it, even though of course Ram is just as bad. Where I'm using a machine translation, it's hard to really tell from the dialogue whether there's anything particularly relevant to the current situation in the back and forth that they're having, but the impression I get is that it's more just to remind us of the dynamic between Rem, Ram and Subaru before anything went wrong, where they were all comfortable with each other's ways, and also the fact that Rem was always the one who was good at things and fast at learning, given we're going to be seeing her being especially resourceful now. Interestingly, this scene would also be quite a while before Rem confessed her feelings to Subaru, so it seems like what he's missing here is just Rem's normal way of being, as a kind and competent maid who loves her sister, rather than as the girl who's completely devoted to him. But this happier scene is definitely very much in the past, and now we return to Subaru in the woods, pursuing Rem and Louis Arneb. He examines the trap that he was hit by in the previous chapter, and he can see that it was definitely something that was made on purpose, rather than something natural that just happened to get in his way. He recognises that Rem was always a competent person. I'm going to talk about how Rem would still be able to make traps despite having lost all of her memories in the discussion part after the chapter summary, as that's a thing a lot of people have been questioning. Subaru continues trying to close the distance between himself and Rem, but now he's checking for traps as he goes. He's only been in the forest for an hour and he's already discovered 10 traps, all of which were designed to slow him down or even break his bones. He thinks about how fortunate he is to have the knife the masked man gave to him, because he can at least cut himself free from certain types of traps. But he's also using his whip to test the ground in front of him before moving forward. But as he keeps going, rather than the traps starting to disappear, where Rem may have thought he wouldn't have made it that far, they're getting bigger and more dangerous. Rem, working without her memories, is growing and learning quickly as she goes, it seems, having always been a hard worker and a good learner. After uncovering another large trap, he looks for the next trace of where Rem has gone and notices some bark scratched off of a tree by a shoe. He realises that Rui Arneb is not making it easy for Rem to escape with her and is struggling rather than cooperating, making it impossible for Rem to fully cover her tracks. He thinks about how he can never forgive Louis, that for eating Rem's memories and name and causing all this, Louis is just as much to blame as the other Sin Archbishops of Gluttony, though he is grateful at least that she's making it easier for him to trail Rem. He gets frustrated, wondering why things have to be this way. He'd been prepared for Rem waking up without immediately being returned to normal. The precedents of Krush and Julius showed him that it was too much to expect for her just to wake up surprised that time had passed and carry on from before. But he feels that this situation, far away from everybody else who would support him and help Rem, and having to chase after a Rem who's hostile, is too harsh. He wonders why destiny always has to make him suffer. And you can just imagine Tappei writing this like, "You thought it was destiny, but it was me, your god." Still, he snaps himself out of feeling sorry for himself and knows that, as always, he just needs to keep pushing forward. He hopes that soon Rem will realise Louis' true nature, but until then, he just has to catch up with her or get ahead of her. Subaru thinks that Rem must know he's pursuing her, otherwise there'd be no reason for her to have set so many traps. She had to have been confident that he hadn't just run away, to invest her time in making so many of them, rather than just in escaping. He thinks that she must be able to detect him because of the witch's scent. He tries to sniff himself, but he just smells kinda sweaty, where for him the witch's scent is something he can feel rather than smell. But he knows that the smell gets stronger when he returns by death, and where he died so many times in the watchtower, which was on the same day all of this is happening, as well as having been killed once by the hunter here, he's basically now the most stanky Subaru he's ever been. He keeps noticing the clues Louis left behind, but since they're just caused by her struggling rather than her intentionally leaving them for him, they're hard to find and not uniform. He sees a big piece of peeled bark on a tree, and at first he thinks it's another clue, but the size and obviousness of it make him uneasy. He thinks that Rem must surely have noticed it too. He manages to activate the trap, and it's a huge hole that brings smaller trees down on top of it, a trap that would have buried him alive if he'd been caught inside of it. He admires the psychological aspect of the trap, with the peeled bark there as bait, but now, from above, Rem jumps down from the peeled tree and onto him. She's screaming at him just to leave, and he gets away from her with just his nose bashed in and bleeding, but he's aware that if Rem decided to attack again, she could push him into the pit from where they are. He holds up his hands and tries to explain that he's not hostile. She asks why he was so persistent, why he wouldn't just let them get away, and he tries to explain that he wants to protect her because she's important and not to hurt her. He tries to explain that even though he smells evil to her, he's not an enemy. But Rem says that even though he smells of something she instinctively thinks is bad, she can't trust him because he wanted to ruthlessly leave a small child behind. Subaru had overlooked this, thinking it was just the way he smelled and her panic that she had lost her memories that had turned her against him. But really it was that to her, Louis looked not like a dangerous sin archbishop, but a defenceless child, and he'd been willing to just abandon her to her fate while trying to find a way to survive with Rem. He wonders if he should apologise, give an excuse, or tell the truth, but he can't think of anything to say that will change Rem's mind about him. He remains silent, and Rem remains numb to him before she turns to leave. He calls out to her, but then suddenly he notices something. He jumps onto Rem's back to pull her down, hoping he's managed to time it right, and an arrow flies over them, hitting the big tree Rem had been hiding in and blowing it away. And that's the end of the chapter. So, as I said earlier in the video, if you want to stick around for a minute, I'd like to discuss some of the big talking points from the first 3 chapters now. One of the big things that people have been discussing is whether the masked man could be Vincent Vollachia. If you don't know who Vincent is, he appears in the X4 novel, which I'm actually in the process of writing a video series summarising, so look out for that. He's the Emperor of Vollakia, and also Priscilla's own Nisan. He's almost certainly going to come up in this arc, where Vollakia is the setting, and in terms of basic physical description, he could match the masked man in the noble clothing who gave Subaru the knife in chapter 2. Japanese speakers have looked at his way of speaking, and it does appear to be quite similar in things like the pronouns he uses to Vincent. Plus, he's described as being charismatic, which is definitely also true of Vincent. He's dressed like a noble and seems to be hiding his identity with the rag over his face, and he's also concerned about assassins, all of which may fit with Vincent depending on the political situation in Vollakia right now. At the very least, he's definitely someone important enough to be worried about assassins. The description of the masked man does kind of fit with Vincent, given he's a slim man in noble clothing, but there are a couple of things that are slightly off. Subaru takes the masked man to be his own age or slightly older, which would put him in his early 20s at most, whereas Vincent Vollachia is described in X4, which takes place before the start of the royal selection, as appearing to Reinhard, Julius and Felix to be in his mid-20s. The wiki says he's 25, though I'm not sure where they got that information from, or whether that's his age during X4 or adjusted to fit the main story, which would be a couple of years later by this point. He's presumably somewhere between 25 and 27 anyway. Natsuki Subaru is 18 after the 1-year time skip before Arc 5, and I don't think an 18-year-old man would usually think of someone in their mid-20s as about their own age, even though there's not a huge age difference there. Now, since Subaru can't see most of his face, it's reasonable he might guess him to be a bit younger than he is, so it's not a strong thing counting against it being him. However, Vincent Vollachia is also described as pale, where the masked man thinks Subaru is too pale to be from around here, which implies he has darker skin than Subaru does. Vollakia has pleasant, sunny weather all year round and no cold season, so it's reasonable to think the majority of people there would be tanned, with Vincent just being comparatively pale enough for it to be mentioned when he's introduced in X4. The fact that the masked man talks a bit like Vincent could also be something that's been done to represent the nobles of Vollakia in general in Tappei's writing, much as all of the people from Kararagi talk with a Kansai dialect, though in that case they actually do, because their country was founded by someone isekai'd from Japan who it seems spoke that way. But it would be likely he'd use ways of speaking to give the impression of a culture and uniformity to people in a particular class and country. Additionally, while both characters are charismatic, Vincent is also said to have an especially dominant and imposing aura, something that it didn't feel like Subaru noticed about the masked man. There's also nothing we know of that says that Vincent Vollachia has the ability to vanish, which is something very particular about the masked man that we met in Chapter 2. My personal gut feeling is that this isn't Vincent. Arc 7 is putting Subaru in a whole new country, and it seems a bit weird that the first person he meets out in the boonies would be the Emperor, and a character that's already been established, who we're expecting Subaru to meet in this arc. There are going to be Vollakian characters in Arc 7 that weren't in X4, I'm sure, and so while this masked man is definitely likely to be important, especially given Subaru states he will definitely repay him for giving him the knife, foreshadowing that they'll certainly meet again, I'm more expecting him to be another Vollakian noble rather than Vincent himself. But of course, I could be wrong, and I'm really looking forward to finding out. I think it's especially interesting that one thing we know about Vincent is that his palace, the Crystal Palace, is inlaid with lots of magical stones, sculpted by masters, and that the mana they emit can make it hard for people who aren't used to being there to use magic. With Subaru's broken gate, and with him being without Beatrice, it would be extremely dangerous for him to find himself there, and the fact that we've been reminded about Subaru's broken gate in the same chapter he meets a Vollakian noble, I can't help but think that's going to come up. Speaking of Beatrice, while the rest of Subaru's allies are trusting him to survive and take care of Rem, where they can't travel to Vollakia, and also need to get the dragon's blood to Pristella and hand over the captured Rui Alphard, I think Beatrice will try to reach Subaru before anybody else. She does have knowledge of the kind of magic that could, if she pushed it far enough, allow for some kind of fast travel. She had her door crossing, and she believed that what had transported Subaru, Rem and Louis was a form of yin magic. While she said it was something that was unique to the Witch of Envy, Beatrice is a master of yin magic and knows ways of using it that are otherwise forgotten by the world. So if anyone could travel to Subaru magically, it would theoretically be Betty. However, she'd need a lot of mana to even try to do anything like that, so I think it's possible that she'll be trying to get hold of magic stones in Pristella from Kiritaka Muse. With them all returning to Pristella, she would also be meeting up with Otto and Garfield, who remained there during Arc 6. And with Tappei having said that they would appear in Arc 7, I kinda wonder if she might come up with a way to bring them with her, where unlike Emilia and the others, they're not involved in the royal selection really, and so could probably disappear off to Vollakia without it causing any immediate political issues. That's just kind of my theory though. I'd love to hear what you guys think. And now for Rem. A lot of people in the comments for my Chapter 2 video were asking how Rem, who doesn't even know her own name, is able to do things like set traps. Wouldn't she need some memories to be able to do practical things like that? Well, actually, I don't think this is really a plot hole. In real life, when people have amnesia, they only forget people and events, and still remember the skills they had before. For instance, they may still know what a car is and be able to drive, they just won't remember ever learning or buying their own car. They don't wake up like babies who can't remember anything about the world and so need to learn things like languages or what the things around them are, or what the consequences of different actions would be. Researchers don't really know why that's the case, where the brain and its storage of information is such a complicated thing in general that we only really understand it up to a point, but it does seem to be what happens. So if all of this was set in the real world, and Rem was a soap opera character with a dramatic case of amnesia, it wouldn't be weird at all for her to be able to make the traps. Now in ReZero, it's a magical kind of amnesia, so it can really work however Tappei wants it to. But from Crush, it really does seem like it works that way here too, and for reasons that are important to the themes of the story. That someone becomes a blank slate version of themselves with their original aptitudes and abilities, but none of the things about them that would have been formed purely by their personal history and memories. Crush reverts back to her more feminine side because she doesn't remember ever resolving to leave that side of herself to Felix and become more masculine, but she's still a fair and reasonable person, so we see what parts of her came from her memories and life experiences and what parts were just her innate personality. With Rem then, she's lost her inferiority complex because she doesn't remember growing up as Ram's twin, and she's lost her devotion to Subaru, but she hasn't lost her desire to protect the weak or her general competency at practical things. How much of a person is them and how much is their memories is a theme that comes up time and again in ReZero and is explored in all kinds of different ways with different characters and scenarios. So what we're likely to see here is a Rem who's basically just pure Rem, with all of the talents and inherent traits of Rem, but none of the effects of Rem's specific life on her personality. This is rather than a Rem who, robbed of all of her memories, is just a completely innocent and defenseless person who has no idea how to do anything or to make decisions about what's going on around her. And that's really all I wanted to discuss for the 3 chapters we've had so far. Let me know what you think in the comments, and thank you for watching this little extra discussion part to the video. It seems like we might be getting 3 chapters a week on Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays, if any sort of pattern can be derived from the 3 chapter releases we've had. So that means a busy day for ReZero on Wednesday, where we may well get chapter 4, along with finally getting to see Emilia's trial of the past in ReZero Season 2 Episode 17. I will be making videos for both of those, so I look forward to seeing you again for them, if you want to check them out. Plus, I have another ReZero related video about Ram that I'm working on right now that should be out later today, so don't forget to subscribe for all of that. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again very soon.